What are the best exercises for spondylolisthesis? That's what we're going to be looking at in this tutorial. We're going to look at what it is, how it manifests. That's going to help us understand the exercises that we're going to look at the end of this tutorial. If you are struggling with lower back pain and you want some help, click the link in the description and you'll go through my How to Overcome Low Back Pain online or face-to-face consultation and coaching. There we're able to understand your triggers, be able to put a plan in place to overcome them and therefore reduce your lower back pain. What is spondylolisthesis? It's a condition that occurs when one vertebral body slips with respect to the adjacent vertebral body, causing radicular or mechanical symptoms or even pain. Now, as you can see in the image that's below that little description, you've got the pars articularis, and in the middle image you've then got spondylolisthesis, and that is where the stress fractures form. And then in the final one you've got spondylolisthesis, which is where it slips. So the stress fractures can be there, which is spondylosis. When it slips, it's spondylolisthesis. So basically it's these stress fractures that build up where the pars articularis is, that then fractures, the vertebra slips, and that is your spondylolisthesis. So now we know what spondylolisthesis is, what we could start to look at is how it manifests. And that is through anterior-posterior shear forces that come from flexion-extension cycles or even extension-rotation cycles. Now, that can happen in any part of life. It doesn't have to be in the gym. It doesn't have to be at a sport, as we're going to talk about in a second. That's happening all the time. Now, there is a caveat to that. When I say it's happening all the time, if it's extreme movement, so extreme ranges of movement, it will be more likely to happen than if it's moderate movement, but it's still able to happen. If it's then moderate or extreme ranges of movement and it's loaded, then again, it's more likely to happen. So if you have very little movement in that area, then it's not as likely to happen. So we have to look at it on that kind of spectrum. So we've got, say, zero movement to low movement to moderate movement to extreme movement. And then if we introduce load into that, then that's only going to speed up each of those processes. So it can happen when you're lifting a box up off the floor. That process could start to happen because it manifests by, I've already mentioned the stress fractures that happen in the pars articularis. Well, they can be very moderate stress fractures and they can be like little micro traumas. They can build up. You don't even know this is happening. And then in one moment, when you experience the pain, you go, it was when I lifted that box off the floor. It wasn't when you lifted that box off the floor. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the build-up over the years, the months of these poor movement strategies that caused the problem, which is the anterior-posterior shear. Now, what is the anterior-posterior shear? Well, anterior shear forces are pulling the vertebra forward to slip. Posterior shear forces are pulling it backwards to slip the other way. What we want are these neutral forces, because what's happening all the time is the vertebra is being pulled in all these different direct lateral shear forces, anterior posterior shear forces. So these shear forces aren't bad, like inherently bad. If they build up and if they become too extreme and if these stress fractures are happening, and if we continue to allow them to build up, then it's a problem. So movement isn't a problem per se, and anterior shear forces and posterior shear forces aren't a problem per se. It's as they build up, it's as we add load. So if we're lifting a heavy box, that's going to cause potentially more damage than if we're lifting a light box. So we have to understand all these different things with regards to how these micro injuries or micro traumas or micro stress fractures build up and then cause the problem. Then we've got sports. So anything really that includes repeated lumbar flexion, and I would add into that lumbar extension and probably lumbar rotation as well. So as an example, gymnastics would be an extreme example, because that is an example of extreme ranges of movement in the spine. When they do their back bends, they are extreme positions to go into. Hence why they are more likely to happen in gymnasts than they are to me or you that just goes around everyday life living. You would also have fast bowlers in cricket. So they go through sort of a lateral bending, extension, rotation type of movements, but they've got the added load when their foot hits the floor, and all that shock goes up through the leg as well. So they've got load and they've got these extreme movements as well. So again, these two sports, it's more likely to happen than others because of the positions and the loads that they're going in, and the loads and the forces that are going through their body. Then you've got another way it can manifest, just degeneration as a consequence of disc herniation or bulge and facet joint inflammation. So these other types of conditions can then manifest into spondylolisthesis. So what we're starting to understand now, we're starting to understand, one, the location of it, two, the mechanisms of the injury. So what we can now start to do is start to understand a little bit more about how to go through some sort of rehabilitation process for that and understand the best exercises to do, which we're going to do next. And the first one is the abdominal brace. So it's not an exercise per se, it is just using your abdominals to hold the vertebra in place. So in the first image you can see the lumbar vertebra highlighted in red, and then in the next image you've got essentially the abdominal wall. So you can see the rectus abdominis at the front, and then you've got the external obliques at the side. Now, as you can see with regards to the lumbar vertebrae, there are no bones holding that structure in place. So if you take away the muscles, the spine collapses. There are some ligaments that are giving a basic stability, but that is a basic stability. The muscles are doing most of it. And it comes down to the abdominal wall that will play a very big part in that. They will hold the vertebra in place. What they will also do is neutralize anterior and posterior shear forces. So essentially what they are doing, they are holding the spine in place. So the first thing that you can do, even just in everyday life, is brace the abdominals. So when you go to lift a box up off the floor, brace the abdominals. When you go down to bend, look into a cupboard that may be under the sink or something, again, brace the abdominals. What that's doing, that's minimizing risk of anterior shear forces, or anterior and posterior shear forces, depending on the direction you're going in, that are going to potentially pull the vertebra out of place. Also, it's holding it's holding the spine in place in general. So you're able to maintain a greater neutral spine. Now, with regards to spondylolisthesis, there is a degree of build-up to it, but there is also, if you just go into the wrong position, it can just slip out and it's going to cause you pain. So whether it's moderate movement, whether it's extreme movement, I would recommend using the abdominal brace to hold it in place. Now, if your spine is going to round, which at some point in everyday life it's going to, again, still use the abdominal brace, because you're still able to hold things, mainly the lumbar spine and that particular vertebra, in place, which is going to be more advantageous for you. So step number one and exercise number one is just use the abdominal brace in everyday life. The second is not an exercise in particular, so I'm using the plank as the example, but it's more the group of exercises and what I'm about to explain that's more sort of prevalent and relevant to what spondylolisthesis is. So we're talking about core exercises, and I'm using the plank as the example. Now, I'm not saying core strength or core endurance or core stability. I'm saying all three. Now, it depends at where you are in your fitness journey of those muscles. So if you go right to a beginner's stage, we need to build up the core strength and the endurance. So we need the strength to be able to get into the plank, and then we need the endurance to be able to hold that position. That is the top image there. So you can see that I'm in a plank and I'm just holding it. So it's nice and simple. It's not necessarily a difficult exercise. We just need to build up the time. Now, if that's too hard for you, go onto your knees, you build up the kneeling plank, and then you go on to the full plank that you can see on the screen here. What you then do is move down into the bottom image, and you can see there that I'm lifting an arm off the floor and putting it on my back. Now, the reason I'm doing that is to create additional strength and additional stability. Now, when you lift an arm off the floor, what wants to happen is your hips will want to either weight shift, rotate, lift, or drop. Any of those movements show an instability through that area. So what we need to be able to do is maintain the centered hips when we lift the arm off the floor. What that's doing, that's causing, so you can see there I'm lifting my left arm up. So when I lift my left arm up, it's causing the left side of my abdominal wall to hold stronger. So there's a little bit more strength, but the timing of that is the stability. Now, the stability is the timing. Now, if there is that roll, or if there is a weight shift, or if there is a lift or a drop, that shows the muscles aren't timing properly, and that's what the instability is. The instability is the muscles not holding. You create the compensation to hold it all over in this position because your body's compensating to hold it up. If you maintain level hips, it means the muscles on this side of the body have got to hold you up that much, or they've got to be, first of all, they've got to have the stability to hold it in place, then they've got to have the strength to keep it there and the endurance to keep it there. So what we need to be able to do is move through that progression. Now, that doesn't mean just the plank. That means plank, side plank, bird dog, bridge. They're just 4 examples. There are more, but those are 4 bodyweight examples that everyone can start doing. And there are progressions to each of those, just like there is there to the plank. Also, with the plank, with the arm raise, you can start on the knees and build up to the full plank with the arm raise. So you would essentially go kneeling plank to full plank, hold, say up to 30 seconds to a minute. Then you would go kneeling plank with the arm raise. Make sure you've got centered hips. Once you've got centered hips, lift up onto the full plank and lift the arm up. So that's a very simple progression that you could go through to build the core strength, endurance and stability of the abdominal wall, and therefore bringing greater stability to the spine. And you can do that, as I mentioned, with the bird dog, with the bridge, and with the side plank. So like I said, those are just 4 examples. There are more. So those are the best exercises for spondylolisthesis, and those are the main reasons why. Because the spine, and particularly that vertebra, needs to maintain stability and be held in place, and the brace and those types of exercises are the best ones to do that. Many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Hole Training. If you've liked the content, please do hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you've got a comment or a question, please leave it below in the comment section. And if you want to watch more tutorials like this, please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon.